Before we begin, a warning. Tonight's episode contains descriptions of torture, execution, and violence against women. Listener discretion is advised. If this feels too heavy, step away, please. Protect your peace first. They called it the Hammer of Witches. What else is a woman but a foe to friendship? A punishment? A necessary evil? Words not whispered in the dark, but inked in Latin, preserved on parchment, blessed by scholars, carried beside Scripture, and with them, centuries of fire, centuries of screams, centuries of ash. This is Peek into the Dark, and I'm Zuzka.
And I'm Luna.
They wanted to burn women out of history, but centuries later, their names echo. Tonight, we unveil the dark story behind the Malleus Maleficarum. We begin with the birth of an obsession in 1486, Innsbruck, Austria. This is where a woman named Helen Schoberin stood accused of witchcraft. Her inquisitor, a German Catholic clergyman by the name of Heinrich Kramer. Helena did not bow her head. She mocked him. She refused his sermons. She called him a fraud. When Kramer tried to prove her guilt, the judges laughed. They declared him unstable, too obsessed with women. You are no man of God. You are a fool. Kramer's rage fermented into obsession. He left Austria and began to write. What emerged was not scripture, but something far more dangerous. The book called Malleus Maleficarum, also known as the Hammer of Witches, is one of the darkest books. Written in 1486, a text that cloaked itself in holy authority, but in truth, sharpened the blade against thousands of women across Europe, and soon became the handbook of inquisitors and witch hunters. The book is divided into 3 parts, or essays, each dealing with a different aspect of witchcraft and persecution. So let's go through them. Part 1 is about its theological foundations. The first part was in fact not about magic at all, but instead about belief. Its purpose was to prove, beyond question, that witchcraft was real, heretical, and dangerous. The authors argued that to deny the existence of witches was itself a form of heresy. They mixed Catholic theology with superstition and folklore, insisting that witches worked hand in hand with the devil to harm people, to wither crops, to spread disease. And here we see one of the most dangerous seeds planted: the claim that women were more prone to witchcraft because of Eve, because of lust, because of so-called insatiable lust. Misogyny on full display. It was not hidden. It was theology. The key themes here are heresy, female weakness, a religious justification for hunting women. Next, we have part 2, and it's about the practices of witches. The second part cataloged what witches were said to do. Lurid descriptions meant to terrify. According to the text, witches made pacts with the devil. They flew to midnight Sabbaths. They cast spells that caused storms, ruined crops, and brought death. It accused them of the most extreme crimes: infanticide, cannibalism, and even sexual congress with demons, the incubi and the succubi. This section also described maleficia, which is the supposed magical methods of witches: curses, potions, charms. In the language of the witch trials, maleficia is a word you'll hear again and again. It comes from Latin, meaning evil or wrongdoing, and in the past, it was the very heart of witchcraft accusations. The main belief being that witches could use magic to bring harm, such as illness, madness, storms, bad luck, and even death itself. So when crops failed, when a child grew sick, when lightning struck or milk soured, it was easy and convenient to blame the shadow of a witch. Accusations of maleficia became the catch-all explanation for every misfortune. And with that one word, suspicion became fear, and fear became prosecution. All, of course, framed as a perversion of divine order. The key themes here are sensationalism, demonology, fabricated evidence of evil practices.
I feel like this book has been rewritten a couple of times.
Yes, I believe it has.
All right, so finally we have part 3, and that was about the legal procedures. The final part, we believe, was perhaps the most dangerous of all. Here, the book became a manual, a step-by-step guide for the inquisitors, the judges, and the clergy to, identify, prosecute, and execute witches. It explained how to gather the testimony and the evidence, but also it talked about how to interrogate witnesses, even children. And most chilling of all, it sanctioned the use of torture in order to extract confessions. The punishments it recommended were merciless. The book not only justified persecution, it gave detailed instructions. What were some of these instruments of faith? Well, we have this strappado, which is where the wrists were bound behind the back, the body lifted high until it could bear no more. The rack, where limbs were pulled wider and wider beyond what nature allows. The iron bridle, a cage of metal that silenced the tongue with sharp restraint. And the ducking stool, plunging a woman or child beneath the water again and again until breath itself was a crime. Here is a quote from the book. For the judge must not be content with a single confession, but must extract the truth through questioning and torture, lest the accused deceive.
So, no matter what, you're guilty.
The answer is torture and you're guilty.
Okay.
To quote Rebecca Nurse from 1692, "O Lord, help me. It is false. I am wronged." Water, rope, fire was the trinity of judgment. Fire burned the body, ashes scattered to erase the name. But memory, that's harder to scatter. The key themes here were the judicial handbook, justification of the torture, and legitimizing witch trials. The Malleus Maleficarum became one of the most widely read and cited texts of its age. In the 16th and 17th centuries, when witch hunts reached their fever pitch, it gave hunters an official credibility. It intensified the persecution of women, of midwives, of healers, of the marginalized. By mixing theology, folklore, and legal instruction, it transformed suspicion into law and fear into fire. It was not just a book. It was a weapon, a hammer that fell most heavily on women whose only crime was being themselves. Every line was venom against women. Here are a couple quotes from the book. Woman is weaker in faith, more prone to witchcraft. A woman is more credulous than a man, and this is why she is more often caught in the works of witchcraft. They declared women's very nature a pathway to Satan, and if she resisted, that became proof too. Here's another quote from the book. If she confesses under torture, she is guilty by her own words. If she denies, the devil has sealed her lips. If she weeps, it is a trick. And if she remains silent, it is defiance. There was no innocence, only a script written in advance. The fire of the hammer spread like contagion. 30 editions in a single century. Judges read it as law. Some read it as gospel. Mobs read it as permission. From Germany to France, Poland to Scotland, even across the seas to the New World, the Americas. Every witch trial, every pyre, every drowning echoed the words of the Malleus. The numbers rose. Historians estimate 60,000 executed, but many whispered the true number was actually closer to 200,000. There were women, widows, midwives, healers, and children. Here's a quote from one of the women. They shaved all of my body, the devil's mark, they said, but it was only a blemish of age. I said yes to all they asked, for the rope burned my wrists, and I thought it better to die than to suffer longer. So what of the authors, the men behind the ashes? Did they pay the price? Heinrich Kramer, driven by obsession, saw his book take root across Europe. But he himself was actually despised. Even within the church, other inquisitors refused to work with him. Records described him as senile and deluded, consumed by lust for women. His obsession became a prison. A man obsessed, remembered not as holy, but as cautionary. And he died alone in 1505, forgotten by his peers. I find that part, to me, like, it's so wild that they can actually come to these conclusions that yes, he is senile, he is deluded, he is obsessed, but they gave his words so much weight.
Yeah.
It just is so disgusting.
Because now they had permission to get rid of women.
Then we have Jacob Springer. The second name on the cover actually remains shrouded in uncertainty, a ghost in history. His name carried shame for centuries, but his agency was uncertain. Some believe that Kramer added his name without consent in order to lend credibility to his book. But others believe that Springer actually gave permission, but took little part. He may never have touched the text, yet history bound him to its terror. So, was he unwilling? Was he complicit? The question of authorship really remains a point of contention. Existing scholarship offers no definitive conclusion, but many bibliographies still attribute the work, and some primarily to Jacob Springer, but we found that more recent research actually suggests that Heinrich Kramer was in fact the sole author, but deliberately invoked Springer's name in order to lend that text greater authority. Although both men were significant theologians, their relationship was marked by hostility and rivalry, with the influential Springer often seeking to undermine Kramer, making it highly probable that Springer's role was limited and mainly served to confer prestige rather than its applicable contribution.
Yeah, I really believe that, if Kramer would have just wrote it himself, there's no way that people would have followed, because he was known as kind of a kook.
But the hammer fell all the same. It's quoted that 2 men wrote this. One died in obsession, the other vanished in shadow. So what of their punishment? Not fire, not court, but the slow justice of remembrance. We remember them as warnings, not as martyrs, not as saints, but as men who weaponize faith and ink against women. And their legacy, blood on parchment, fear in law, and names etched in history as lessons. It is really easy, centuries later, to think of this as distant, as like medieval cruelty, superstitions long gone. But the echoes are still with us. In the suspicion of women's knowledge, the dismissal of women's voices, the punishment of women's bodies. The Hammer of Witches was not only a book of torture, it was a mirror of fear. They feared women who healed, feared women who resisted, and they feared women who would not be silent. That fear, when given the language of law and faith, became a weapon sharper than iron.
The Malleus Maleficarum declared women weak. Yet women endured. They survived the rope. They survived water. They survived fire. They wanted silence. What they got was memory. The woman they burned became ancestors. The healers they tortured became symbols. And the words they wrote now serve as warnings. They buried us, but they did not know we were seeds. The seeds of survival. Thank you for listening to this episode of Peek into the Dark, where the voices they tried to silence rise again.